this the last talk of the day? Oh. Hi, everybody. Everyone's still awake?
Show us cool stuff.
Yeah, cool stuff. My name is David Zielinski. I'm going to talk about the challenges of VR application distribution. So first off, how did I get here? A little bit of a bio. I got involved with virtual reality back before it was cool. Back in 2003, 2004, when I was doing my master's degree at UIUC, they had a very early cave system, which is one way to experience virtual reality. I then came over here as staff in 2004. You can see a picture on the left there of the Duke Dive. So I spent a long number of years kind of writing software for that, helping maintain that, but towards kind of the end of that, some of the headsets started to come in, and I did get some experience working on some projects like the HoloLens, which is an AR, kind of mixed reality display. And then just, I guess coming up on a year now, maybe a year ago, I moved over to the Smith Warehouse here at the other end of the building. And I've been working a bunch, kind of the last year, on the Oculus Go, which I'll talk a little bit about some of the projects we've done with that. But I think in the coming year, I'm looking to also branch out onto some of the other kind of related VR and AR technologies, kind of like the phone AR stuff, and kind of motion capture suits, kind of full body tracking of all the hands and all the joints that I think are, for interaction, kind of interesting. So if we talk about kind of the eras of hardware systems, when I started working on VR stuff, it was kind of the era of expensive and bespoke. I think I used that right. Did I use that word right? Bespoke, yeah? Yeah, bespoke VR
Way
system.
to become a humanist.
Yeah, see, I like using, I was like, that's a good word to put in a VR talk, bespoke, yeah. Era of expensive and bespoke systems.
Yeah.
The tricky thing about that is everything was very homebrew. All the systems were individually made. There wasn't like a store. You didn't buy these things off Amazon. You'd have contractors installed. They're all different sizes, all different resolutions. Nothing is standardized. Everybody was writing their own libraries, so it wasn't really an era where there was a lot of sharing or distributing of the projects. You really kind of had to go visit other people. Like it was fun though, because you got to go visit, but that was one of the great things of like, you'd go visit someone's system to experience their content. So it wasn't this thing where you could even really experience their applications in your own university. So it's kind of a different era. Then comes along kind of the Oculus DK1, and there's a big kind of like dotted line there. It's kind of the era of the low-cost VR hardware, which is really made possible from the smartphone arms race. So the fact that we're all carrying around, well, I guess some people have it plugged in or left it at home, but a lot of us are carrying around these screens that are always higher and higher resolution, higher and higher processors. So a lot of the reasons VR got popular isn't because people were like, oh, we're going to make really great VR hardware. It was really the cell phone arms race that pushed it in that direction. But because everything's cheaper, it means there's some standardization. You can buy things on Amazon. You can have the exact same hardware that maybe your collaborators or people you want to share the app with. It's not a custom thing. And we'll go into a little bit about sharing some of that stuff. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about just the hardware and software obsolescence that I've already experienced in my own life, just within the last couple of years. So the first one there, literally just the other day, I was brought in on a project. A visiting scholar had a DK2, which was a headset that was a successor to the first Oculus. So this is only a headset released in 2014, so only 5 years ago. They had a binary, so an executable of the project, and we were struggling. We could not get it to work with Windows 10 with all the latest drivers and everything. So it's really interesting to me that already 5 years later on, a pretty mainstream product, we were like, well, we're going to build up a machine with Windows 7, and we're going to go back in time, and we ended up not doing that. But it's really interesting. I just wanted to give a real-world case study. In my own life, I'm like, oh, wow, we couldn't just instantly resuscitate this project. Another one is, the Duke Dive, where it was 14 years or something. That's going to be decommissioned soon, so a lot of the projects that we had there, how are we going to experience them again? I guess we've got YouTube videos. And the software tools libraries used to create the application support modern hardware. So I guess for a while, I thought, oh, I'll be safe and I'll use an open source kind of stack. I'll use C++, OpenGL, Syzygy. Oh wait, but the open source library is no longer maintained. So even though I built it on an open source stack, there's some projects in there where I'm like, well, I guess I'm not going to be running that on the latest headsets. That's another ways that this has kind of happened. And then finally, we were using a commercial game engine for a lot of the stuff back in the day there, and that now has gone defunct. So those are some case studies from my own life of obsolescence, but we're not going to dwell on the past. We're now going to maybe talk about how we would create right now. So if you haven't made a lot of projects for VR before, maybe you're going to learn a lot in the next couple slides, hopefully. So this is kind of my big chart here. So we've got kind of the different outcomes on the left there of things we can have. So we'll start with 360 videos, which is kind of just an extension to a lot of video type workflow. So it can be very easy, no coding. Not very interactive kind of system there though, so it is limited in a certain way. But we'll talk about it later. That might, because it's a very, it's an MP4 file, it might be very easy to stick on a server and preserve and still view in the future. Web page, WebVR is something that you might not even know about. It's a little obscure, but basically, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's literally just an HTML and JavaScript file. So you can make whole VR applications kind of just as a web page, so pretty easy to store on a server. However, because it's going as using the web browser as an intermediary, it's lower performance, which means lower quality visuals. Everyone's always complaining every day about how VR is not realistic enough already. So then we're saying, oh, let's cut down our number of, triangles and everything we can use anyway even further. So another problem too is the web is changing quickly. And it'll be interesting. I'm not really sure if you made a web VR app right now, 5 years from now, it's going to run on the web browsers 5 years from now. So that's another, it's just the standards are all iterating very fast on that. One of the areas I work in a lot is generating binaries or kind of executable packages using game engines usually. This is going to give us our highest performance, highest visual quality, most flexible interaction programming. But it's a little bit messy because there's a separate build for each platform, distribution, and as I've even seen in my own life, the tools can go away. Or as happened with some of, I think, our collaborators, I don't think Ed's here, wasn't there a big Sketchfab thing? So the tools can either go away or they can change their monetization. So sometimes the prices of everything that you were expecting or your number of, I think it was the file size or something?
Yeah, and the storage capacity.
Yeah, so that's another thing, just that when you start to buy into these ecosystems, sometimes it's not about them even going away, it's about the rules can change and all your content's in there. So something to think about. And finally, we have kind of these easy VR authoring tools, no coding. Oftentimes there's a money element there. I think from a pedagogical standpoint, sometimes I'm a little nervous teaching those tools because it's usually a very specific tool, and if that tool goes away, I'm like, what's really transferable beyond that? So I do kind of like the more programming-based game engine stuff. If I'm going to teach somebody a skill, that things that will be still relevant and in the future. And the tools can go away or change. So let's break down into specifically. Let's talk about 360 videos. If you were right now saying, I want to make a 360 video, just you can put on a headset and kind of look around, what tools would I use? Well, I just looked it up, so the prices are current. Right now on Amazon, you could go buy Insta361. It doesn't really show it in the picture, but it's got a camera on one side and on both sides. So it's like a double camera system. So that's what allows it to capture all around you. There's a new one, the Views XR, that kind of can either do that camera on each side or kind of spread out to make kind of 180 stereo videos. So you usually get a sequence of raw files, you process it some way, and then you just get an MP4 file. This can be loaded onto YouTube, kind of on the right there, or you can sideload, is the terminology they're going to use on an Oculus Go, because it really is just a glorified cell phone. I have the Oculus Go right here. So really, this is just under the hood a glorified cell phone. It's an Android cell phone. So you can sideload, which is basically just uploading the file into the local library, so it's not over Wi-Fi. You're not involving YouTube at all. But yeah, so there's a YouTube VR app on the Oculus Go App Store, and that allows you to watch these videos. So actually, the distribution in there is pretty easy, and in the long term, it seems a little sustainable because it's MP4 files. So it doesn't seem, except for maybe the resolutions going way up or things like that changing. So web VR, you can see there's an example. A-Frame is one of the open source, I think Firefoxes and Mozilla are really championing that. It's really just a .js file you include there, and then you start listing your assets down on here. So I think in terms of open sourceness, this is really great, but like I said, it's a web standard, so I'm a little nervous about if I made something in this and didn't maintain it, 5 years from now it's going to run. And there's all the performance issues I was talking about later. We have a ton of time, I can show an example. We'll get into, okay, so the binaries, this is where I spend a lot of my time, specifically on the Unity game engine. So there's some stuff there in the middle, but basically there's some different ways to add in VR support, usually by bringing in an external plugin, although Unity more and more has stuff built in. But for example, working on the project that I'll talk about for just a second later, I go to the asset store, bring in the Oculus integration plugin, and kind of ready to go and start, instead of developing a 2D game with Unity, I'm now in the VR world. And then finally, when we build, the good thing about Unity is you can push out and kind of build to all these different targets to create these kind of executable packages, or they can be side-loaded onto the device. And finally, easy VR authoring tools. I just was looking up a couple of these. These aren't really my specialties because, like I said, I work mainly with the game engines because I really like the flexibility in the programming. But for example, Revit there's several plugins, I think some even officially supported now, that kind of will VRitize architectural projects, which can be really great because, architects don't always want to have to, fire up a game engine. I was looking just for things that were for the Oculus Go. There's one company, VR Direct, that kind of lets you create. It seems aimed at kind of, selling houses and stuff, but I think Duke even has kind of a 360 platform like this, where it's hopspots, where you jump to the next spot around. So there are some tools out there that, can make the 360 videos a little bit more interactive, or at least you can jump to the next 360 video sphere without any programming. But there again, your content's locked in there. Questions about if it's going to be around 5 years from now. And then I guess educationally, the biggest one everybody talks about is Google Expeditions. Just kind of a 360 videos where you can put in annotations and other text. And there's actually some cool stuff there with how they've been able to link multiple headsets together. So in an education way, making sure everybody's looking at the same kind of part of the story is really cool. So that's kind of an overview of some of that. Let's talk a little bit about app stores. So when you've got the binary apps, you fire up this thing and there's like a menu of things you can download or pay to download, which can be nice, can make it easy to install the binary apps. There's a couple big stores right now. There's the Steam kind of Valve store. Oculus has its own kind of ecosystem. I read just now that Epic Unreal is launching an app store. And then maybe it would apply more to kind of AR or Google Cardboard apps, which I didn't even talk about, but iTunes and Google Play are also stores where some of this content lives. So some disadvantages. So I'm actually, full disclosure, I'm researching this now because one of my goals this year is to try to actually get one of our projects on one of the app stores. So, this is just from what I've read. Invite me back for the next conference.
Well, and would that be considered publishing scholarship?
I think that's
That would be
a
up for
good question.
That's a great question.
I think if your goal is to get it out into the educational world or something where schools are going to feel comfortable downloading and using it, where it has to be really easy to install it, then getting it on an app store is going to make it real easy for an educational sense. If you're just trying to collaborate with other scholars, they might put through the effort to be able to sideload packages or do some of the more advanced stuff. Anyway, so I looked it up. Steam has a $100 application fee, which is a little bit higher than I expected, but I guess, considering they have to devote time to it or don't want to be flooded with apps. Oculus seems to have the most. There's a whole long list of technical requirements that you have to pass before they will even publish your thing. I know Nevio, my collaborator over there, he said they had some issues where they were trying to submit an app and just got rejected right away. They also, Oculus also seems to be the toughest on the content requirements. So, maybe not for if we're doing archaeology or something, but there's some real, if we're maybe doing a more art project, if you had any sorts of violence or political or adult content, that could really just get you booted from the App Store. Whereas right now, I guess Steam is in the middle of changing its rules, and they're thinking about going down a more anything goes policy. So that'll be interesting to see, but then again, if they go down that policy, maybe certain schools or parents will start blocking the Steam standards. So I think, just like kind of Nintendo cultivated a little bit more wholesome image, kind of by locking it down. I think it seems like Oculus is doing the same thing, trying to really limit that down. So yeah, Git. So I'm glad we got to talk about source repositories. So some of the problems with that is Unity projects can be very large. They're often over the 1 gigabyte GitHub limit. I think it's 100 megabytes per file. So some of the big models, just like instantly, you're going to get flagged and you can't use that. My solution that I've been using the last couple of years is I've been using gitlab.oit.duke.edu, which is great if you're inside Duke. You can make it so it's viewable to the outside world, but if I was going to start working on projects that had a lot of collaborators that didn't have net IDs, I'm not exactly sure how we would make that work. Another big problem is utilizing paid assets. So if I buy a cool model of I don't know, a TV set or something, or a horse or whatever, in the asset store and put it in my project, well, how can I then really have a free repository? Because I have this asset that I paid, and the person who made that asset isn't going to be cool that you can kind of bypass the asset store. I think the ideal there is you need some sort of technical solution where there's a Git submodule solution that somehow pulls directly from the asset store. So I think Unity would have to get involved with that. But so we should all write Unity letters, I guess, to try to figure this out. Because otherwise it means that a lot of the little extra plugins you want to add are tricky. And then this is the one on our current project. So we're heavily using Mapbox, which is a way to display maps and GIS data. And it's kind of a free asset, but it's one of those things where they're keeping track of how many monthly users you have. And I think it's like 50,000 or something, which sounds like a huge number, but I guess if you get slashdotted or written up in some article, so I guess we don't know yet, like what's going to happen with that. It could never be a problem, or someday they send me the bill and I'm like, whoops. So that's just something to think about, of these things that I don't know yet how these are going to work out, but a lot of these libraries will sometimes try to monetize in that way with number of monthly users. So the actual project, which is loaded onto these headsets right now. So if you want a chance, I think after is that right, Amanda? After this, we'll have a little bit of time to look at this. So this is a kind of still work in progress kind of project I'm doing with Nevio Dalon over there in the audience in the Dig Lab. And so kind of an archaeology project where we're trying to map up kind of the conceptual kind of space here, or the schematic view of the space, with some of the textual references to the original Greek sources, but also to some of kind of the more current map-based views of what the overhead views are. So trying to tie that all together in kind of an interactive kind of VR space. And so that's been a pretty good project. We're actually going to go, we're going on a road trip. We're getting in the van. We're going to go hang out and present this app. So, and this is the one where I said, hopefully maybe after some feedback from the conference, or maybe some feedback from some of you today, after you see the app, we'll change it and maybe eventually get it on one of the app stores. Is kind of our plan of how this is going to be published, but, still thinking about that. Also, final slide, self-promotion. If you have any students that would like, or if you would like to hang out and learn some more about Unity. So Unity is one of the game engines that's used a lot to create not only 2D desktop content, smartphone applications. Probably the most famous use of it was Pokemon Go, the recent app. So it's very heavily used for 2D stuff, but there's a lot of things that can make it great for VR and AR and other type things we haven't thought of yet. But yeah, so the class, I've taught it for years now, and I think that's something to think about as a way to kind of learn about some of this technology. I don't know, hopefully that answered some questions or raised even more.